Welcome, everyone, to Ladder Daily Digest. We honor creators, and today we have back Rob Lauer. Thanks for coming on the show, Rob.
Thanks for having me.
Randy, thanks for co-hosting.
Always a pleasure. Well, we appreciate you being here, Rob. This is exciting for me because I really admire what you do online and your projects. I'm excited to hear your story.
Well, thanks. It's good to meet you. I've been watching you with Jane for a while, so it's good to finally meet you.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yeah, so Rob has been on Mormonish and other shows like that. Have you ever been on Mormon Stories yet?
I have not, no. And
not even in a panel?
Actually, I'll take that back. Mike Rashan, who founded Reform Mormonism, and I were interviewed by John DeLynn in November of 2004 or 5. We were one of his first interviews. He did it over the phone. We didn't know what podcasts were then. Nobody did. And the sound quality was so bad he couldn't use it. But when I first met John at a Mormon Stories event at Craig Prince's house back in 2012, he introduced you. Oh, I feel so bad that interview with you didn't turn out. We couldn't use it.
Right.
But, yeah. So actually, I haven't.
I think John uses that as a secret ceremony for his upper level members. Where they take oaths and covenants to not share it with anybody else.
Yeah. Well, after, once he got going with the videos and all, back then podcasts were just audio, like radio shows. So.
Yeah. And I know that did you do a reading of one of your plays with Rebecca?
Yeah, they actually produced this would have been 2024. Yeah. Last year. Gosh. They did a public reading of The Beehive State, my play about post-manifesto polygamy that I wrote in the mid-'80s and actually was produced successfully in Virginia in 1999.
And a memorable interview I did with you was the best of Joseph Smith, I believe.
Yeah, I nerded out on
a year ago
theology and philosophy and the Enlightenment and all that nerdy stuff.
Because my idea was like people joined the church. It grew to be, 1 million members 100 years after Joseph's death. And so he did something, we'll say, right.
Oh, yeah. Well, and Mormonism is, much bigger than the LDS church, too. That's just one denomination. Biggest one, the loudest one. But just like evangelical Christians don't represent Christianity per se, all of it, the LDS church does not represent Mormonism universally. So.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And so Rob, I've come to learn, participated or at least attended Sunstone early on in his career.
Yeah.
And you think you were there near the beginning?
Well, okay. I first became aware of Sunstone my first semester at BYU, which was the fall of 1979. The foundation of the magazine was founded in 1975, so just 4 years earlier. One of my roommates at the time, I had 5 of them, so I can't remember who he was. I think he was a grad student, but he was somehow supported Sunstone early on. And so he always had copies of it. When I moved in my first week, he had several copies of Sunstone laying around the apartment. My other roommates, being devout LDS, were blind to it. They had no interest. And I picked it up because I was a Mormon history nerd. That's what brought me into Mormonism to begin with. And I loved it. I mean, it had great articles. I thought, wow. And they were actually, at that point, they were still selling it. I'm not sure if they do now, in the BYU bookstore. And so when it came out, I became a faithful reader of it. And this was during the 79, early 80s. There was a lot going on in the LDS church. There was the whole debate over feminism and the excommunication of Sonia Johnson, who was also a Virginian, for her support of the ERA and her remarks about patriarchy, which at that point the LDS church was still very protective of. And they were getting into the scholarship, what would eventually become in a few years known as the New Mormon History. They were very much in the forefront of publishing that type of stuff. So I was all in. I loved reading the stuff. I'd buy Sunstone whenever it came out. Every month it came out in the bookstore at BYU. If I was reading it and someone, say in Cougar eating lunch with friends or something, and they would ask me about it, they would always show some concern, like, well, does the church publish that? And I said, no, it's a Sunstone Foundation in Salt Lake. Well, does the church approve of that? And I said, well, no. Well, they must, because they're selling it at the BYU bookstore. So that's sort of
pretty sure they were
It's straight from Satan. If the church doesn't approve it, straight from Satan.
Back then, it was really weird. You only had two LDS publishers, really. There was Deseret Books, which was basically the publishing arm of the LDS Church, and then there was Bookcraft, which was the second largest LDS publisher. And of course, general authorities published through Bookcraft all the time. Mormon Doctrine by McConkie was published by Bookcraft. But there was still, I noticed this when I went out west in 79 for the first time, there was this real, did Deseret publish that or did Bookcraft? And if Bookcraft published it, well, it was questionable because it was not official. So, McConkie's Mormon Doctrine, written by an apostle, was published by questionable publisher, Bookcraft, which was about as orthodox as you could get.
And the thing, because of the dogmatic approach to only read approved sources or however.
If I had been raised in Methodism and Protestantism with that viewpoint, I would never have discovered Mormonism.
Right.
Which maybe in some way would have saved me a lot of heartache, but I'm glad I did. I totally did not understand that mindset in the LDS culture. And it was stronger in Utah than it was in Virginia at the time.
Yeah. So this is the 50th anniversary of the founding of Sunstone. And like we were alluding to, they are believing Mormons that are founding Sunstone. They just want to explore what they consider to be real or better scholarship history.
Peggy Fletcher, now Peggy Fletcher Sack, was one of the founders of it. And she was devout. She came from a devout Mormon family. Her grandfather was he was a scientist at BYU and then later Columbia. He invented electric hearing aids and stereophonic sound. So she came from a very well-known, very respected LDS family and was totally into the religion and culture and all, but certainly, was doing it as a scholar. She was not going to throw out. What I found so refreshing in Mormonism generally, as I encountered it in my studies, was this idea that truth is the knowledge of things as they were, as they are, and as they will be. That's the scriptural definition that Joseph Smith gave of truth. Basically, truth isn't this spiritual thing. It's a knowledge of facts. And so I went into the LDS Church with that. Wow, these people believe in embracing the facts, only to get and find out, no, not really. If it's a faith promoting fact, but if it's not, they'll go with the alternative fact would be the current way to describe it.
Yeah, and even
it's got a dash ISH after it, facts-ish.
Yeah, facts-ish, yes.
But you can even say like Moroni's promise is sort of a scientific method of trying to gather truth.
Yeah, right? That's so real because I read that, of course, in the Book of Mormon before I came into the church and encountered LDS missionaries. And I did not, of course, nowhere in the text does it say Moroni's promise. That's basically a sales pitch that the LDS Church probably developed sometime in the missionary program in the 70s or 60s. So when I first met Mormon missionaries, Moroni's promise. And they gave me an official LDS copy of the Book of Mormon with that in the front. And I thought, And it was basically you have a warm, fuzzy feeling about what you're reading in the Book of Mormon or about specifically the principles that the character of Moroni or Mormon is putting forth there in that particular book. And that means it's all true.
That's right. Well, but the idea is that you test it. And if it works for you,
right,
then it's true for you.
But then you have to buy it in hook, line, sinker to everything else. Whereas in the context of the text, it's just talking about certain principles.
Right. The real scientific method, if it's true for me, it's true for everybody.
Right. And of course, if you know something's true, you have to be very careful because then you could lose your knowledge, aka lose your testimony, which never made sense to me. I thought, what? How does that work? How do you know, for instance, that 2 + 2 = 4, a fact, and then you can't lose that knowledge. You might forget it, but and so this idea that you could learn the truth, the facts about the LDS Church's claims, and then never, you have to constantly be on guard of losing that knowledge Whereas aside from, senility or Alzheimer's, I don't know how you actually lose knowledge.
There you go.
So it never made sense to me. But what I found refreshing in Sunstone was that they were approaching religion, actually the way the denomination I've been raised in, the United Methodist, the way the most mainstream Protestants approach the history of their faith and theology. It's more from a scholarly perspective and from a secular perspective. But, that's the way you study religion, just like any other historical or sociological phenomenon. You have to approach it not as a believer, but as sort of a skeptic, or just
as a discipline.
As a discipline, yes. That's very much in line with the scientific method, which is the method that's used in history.
Right. And so,
can I comment about Moroni's promise? It's to me, it's a lot like getting a priesthood blessing in the hospital. If you happen to get better, it's thanks to that priesthood blessing.
Yeah.
If you pass away, it's because that's what God wanted. But
Well,
it's never that the blessing didn't work. So with Moroni's promise, you read the book and you're kind of intrigued, and it's like, well, they said I would feel that I should join or not join. I think I'll join. So obviously that was the Spirit telling them they should join.
We know that's very much the typical magician / faith healer method is, if I'll do this, I'll perform this magic or I'll perform this healing, and if it doesn't take, then you must have done something wrong. Or, right. God wants you to get well, but he wants us out. Somehow you need to get right with God first.
Right. Or somebody wasn't faithful enough. Right. Yeah, their faith needs to be strong.
You don't find the buried treasure. Okay, well, did you put the sticks in the correct figuration of the circle around where you were digging? It's all the same thing. And you find that in all religion and all magical worldview disciplines or whatever. But with Moroni's promise, he's actually talking about God not changing and goodness not changing. And, and being a good person and following the teachings of Christ. And it's very much focused on ethics in context of the text. So I found it very interesting that the LDS took that out of context of the text and it tried to apply it as something historical. You can know the historicity of this, of our claim, what we're claiming about this book, and thus our truth claims of the church, basically by following, quote unquote, Moroni's promise.
Yeah, as long as you do the pseudo scholarship attempt, you don't have to do the real scholarship.
Yeah, and so Sunstone did the real scholarship. They were doing real scholarship.
That's right.
This is pre the New Mormon History. I would say the New Mormon History really came about as much, not just because of Juanita Brooks or Fawn Brody, but also because of what they were doing at Sunstone.
Right. Or Leonard Arrington, right?
And Leonard Arrington, was great, but he was somewhat of an apologist, I think, for the church.
Sure.
He wasn't going to. Well, he couldn't. He was being paid by the church and published by the church, so he couldn't actually.
He still was a gatekeeper.
But he was a gatekeeper. And that's what was so refreshing about Sunstone. There weren't gatekeepers. They were just diving in and exploring all aspects of the Mormon history and culture.
It was a democratic way of gatekeeping.
Yeah. And actually, if you read the Doctrine and Covenants, that's the way the church is actually set up to be.
That's right.
In fact, the LDS Church is set up nothing according to what is described in the Doctrine and Covenants, when things actually were more democratic.
So the magazine started to do symposia.
Yeah, and I'm not sure when that actually was. Also, in 1981, they published a secondary publication every month called Sunstone Review. That was probably only 2 or 3 years. I think they've just revived that online as a blog, I believe.
Like a Reader's Digest version of all the...
It was actually totally different. It was the same approach to everything, but it was more news. It was more almost like it was actually printed on newsprint, and they sold that at BYU too. It was much cheaper. It was just, much smaller than Sunstone, the magazine. And but they were really focusing on like what's actually happening right now. With the magazine being published every month, you have to plan, months ahead of time, a year ahead of time, what you're going to publish, and then it's all working towards that goal of publishing that particular edition. But with the Sunstone Review, it was more about what had happened like last month. It was much more like a newspaper, and it was great too. My first time I was actually mentioned in Sunstone was actually in their March 1983 edition of Sunstone Review. They came in, they reviewed BYU's production of my play Digger, which was produced by BYU in December of 1982, which it won BYU's Mayhew Award and was produced at BYU, and was a play that showed Joseph Smith as a money digger looking in a hat at a peepstone, making up fake visions in order to manipulate people, but then also seemingly being very sincere when he's describing his first vision, which in context of the play was the 1832 vision where he just sees Jesus, and it's all just about his personal salvation.
That's right. You won the award, but you weren't allowed to accept it at the award ceremony.
Yeah, no, I went and accepted it, and I remember Chuck Whitman, who was one of the heads of the drama department. They had not yet made it. They usually any Mayhew Award winner had a full production on their main stage. There were 3 or 4 stages in the BYU theater building, and the big one was like full production, huge sets, and all of that. And they had always produced the Mayhew Award winners on the main. This is one of their main seasons, one of the 4 or 5 main plays presented that year. And they were still, when I got the award, I remember Chuck Whitman saying that as he announced what the play was, he crossed his fingers like this, and we have our fingers crossed that we can produce this play because it's a beautiful play. They decided later in the summer not to because it was too controversial, but they did produce it as a graduate production, which is the grad student produced it in the Nelke Theater, which was a smaller theater, but it was still a full production, and played for 1 week, and sold out every night. And Sunstone Review came and reviewed it in their March 1983 issue of Sunstone Review and gave it a great review. I mean, I called it a milestone in Mormon drama, and took a really and they took a very scholarly and interesting approach to reviewing the show, because they started out talking about how at this point the attacks on objective historians had begun within the LDS Church. And so they started the review saying that in the recent year or two, there has been a debate on where to draw the line as far as studying Mormon history goes, or to be pro-faith or more critical. And they said, and now here is this play that's a synthesis of both, and yet it's neither. And the whole thing is that art transcends history, and it transcends apologetics, and that's sort of what I accomplished in the play. I'd written the darn thing, and I hadn't even thought about it like that. So Sunstone Review sort of taught me, and it was the first play I had written. I was just in my early 20s. Really, it sort of taught me to step back at what I had been working on for 3 years and reevaluate it, and reevaluate art and the power of theater in a new way. So I sort of their review of Digger actually expanded my concept of what literature and fiction is and how it can be used, especially when writing about Mormon history or Mormon characters. So their review sort of, I probably learned as much from their review and what I contemplated over the next year after reading it as I did during my last year at BYU.
That's right. And I interviewed you a little over a year ago, and you gave us your story, and people can go to that and learn more. So, and we're talking about how you interact with Sunstone. So that's your first major interaction.
March of 83 was my first official interaction. And then Sunstone Magazine contacted me in 1987. They wanted to publish Digger. They had started publishing every year. They tried publishing a Mormon play. There really weren't that many. They actually, I think, had published, or they would a little bit later, they published the very first version of Mormon Boy by Stephen Fales, which is about being gay and Mormon. And but that was a little bit later. They contacted me in 87 about publishing Digger, and I hadn't even looked at the script actually since 1983. So I pulled a copy out and sent it to them, and they published it the next year in their November 88 issue. And here it is. It was the front cover.
Oh, very cool.
And they actually hired an illustrator to do gorgeous illustrations of it. And I'd also written a very cynical poem about Joseph Smith and the church's attitude towards him called Eulogy at the Burial of Brother Joseph. And I just sent that in too. And so they also published that in the same issue after
Oh, wow.
at the back of the show, the script. So so that was, and then I got some comments. Gary Bagheera, I think, wrote a letter in one of the following issues praising the play and praising them for publishing it. Probably 2 or 3 issues after that, someone else wrote a very angry letter at them for publishing it. And but then they contacted me when I told them at this point I was working on, I'd written a play, The Beehive State, and I was going to produce that was being produced in Virginia in the summer of 1989. And so they said, can you send us a copy of the script? We'd like to publish that in our December 89 issue. And so that was published in the December of 89 issue of Sunstone as well. And so, so both of those plays were published, earlier versions of those plays were published in Sunstone in 88 and 89. And I think the Association for Mormon Letters actually gave Sunstone an award or acknowledgement in 1990 or 91 for publishing Mormon plays. And they specifically pointed at the 2 that I had written as proof, as evidence that Sunstone was promoting, Mormon drama and Mormon fiction.
Now, up to this
Well,
point,
I don't know that it's.
Up to this point, you
seems
hadn't
like
attended any of the symposia yet, right?
Had not. No, I did not. And I'm not. I'm thinking those started later in the 80s or maybe the mid 80s. At that point, I was living in Virginia and New York City, so I wasn't really, and I wasn't in the LDS Church again until I left in 80. Excommunicated in early 85 and came back in September of 94. But I was still reading Sunstone during those years.
I was just going to make reference to the point that you said Mormon fiction, but it sounds to me like there's a lot more truth in your plays than in the actual
traumatized.
Yeah, well, there is. That is my, as a playwright and as a writer, that's my whole thing. I mean, the audience should not have to believe in the religion to appreciate a play. Nobody insists, you don't have to convert to Orthodox Judaism to get Fiddler on the Roof. You don't have to be a nun to enjoy Sound of Music. So, and you don't have to be a stripper to enjoy
or the Flying Nun.
Why do you have to be Mormon to understand a play or a piece of fiction that is about Mormon characters or about set in Mormon culture? You shouldn't have to. And too much of LDS fiction is basically apologetics or art as a missionary tool, which is the way the church loves to frame it. If you're writing as a missionary tool, you're not a dramatist. You're a missionary. A work of fiction, the characters have to be believable as human beings, and all of us have our doubts about things, or we intend to do one thing, and yet the consequence of our actions turns out to be something else. That's life. But drama is holding up a mirror to life, or you're creating an illusion of life for the audience. And if the characters are just one-dimensional or two-dimensional, if they're villains or saints or apostates or whatever, you're going to lose the audience. They might agree with your point, but they're going to be bored. On
sort of like how the Book of Mormon was written, either villains or angels.
Exactly. And, of course, when anyone tries to write fiction based on the Book of Mormon stories, they have to create all that themselves. Probably some of the dramas or the fictionalized versions of some of the Book of Mormon stories are much more interesting than the Book of Mormon itself, as far as that type of literature goes, because it's but
we had to do that by ourselves by reading between the lines.
Exactly, and which is good. People should do that when they're reading scripture, but it certainly does not compare to the Hebrew Bible, to the Tanakh, or even the New Testament, which is, look at the Old Testament and show me one person who's a hero from the time they're born to the time they die. None of them are. In fact, usually the greatest heroes and the people who are the great usually end up falling Joseph. I'm sorry, Jacob had a shaky start there. David, King Saul, Solomon, all of these great heroes in the Bible actually, in LDS parlance, die apostates.
That's
That
right.
they
In the
fall
Book of
from.
Mormon, the closest you get is Alma and the sons of Mosiah, who were totally bad as kids and then totally good
Totally
after
good.
they
Yeah.
converted.
I mean, I think, and yet the Book of Mormon itself at the end, and I think of that those silly Freeburg paintings, which are just so homoerotic on one level. But there's that picture of Moroni with his helmet on. It looks more like a Viking. And then there's that, a naturally muscular, dying, aged Mormon with his hand outstretched and the sun setting behind him. It's very Hollywood.
That's
But
how I look now.
yeah, I looked that way until a year ago, right? But that over the top melodrama that you see in that one particular page, I think really does personify very melodramatically sort of the one bit of pathos which is in the Book of Mormon at the end, which is that the civilization falls, the people fall. And I see the Book of Mormon more as written in the 1820s as sort of a warning to America, the American Republic, that we can't. Freedom doesn't mean just embracing everything and rejecting, ethics and morals. I think that's pretty much where Joseph Smith was originally coming from, more from a social gospel aspect. And just a warning, because the Republican government, free government, that was brand new in human history, and I think Americans, and especially religious Americans, on some level, were scared shitless about what could happen.
That's right. And so we talked about whether you had attended a Sunstone symposia.
Mm-hmm.
And did you, before you presented, or was your first attendance a presentation?
Well, okay. Well, back when I discovered Reformed Mormonism in 2004, Mike Rashad, who started it, we worked very closely, a group of. So I actually thought of going to the symposium probably around 2006, 7, 8, and presenting on Reformed Mormonism. But at that point, Mike had attended a couple, and he said, it's just all focused on the LDS Church at this point. And I think this was true based on what I was reading in Sunstone. A lot of it was just people griping about the LDS Church not being liberal enough or progressive enough, all justifiable arguments. But there didn't seem to be much, from Mike's perspective, having attended, much positive. Like where would he even fit in? We're saying that as Reformed Mormons are trying to say, the Mormon culture, there are some valuable things in it. You can be Mormon culturally without being a member of the LDS Church. There are aspects of Mormon theology and folklore and myth and stuff that you can find meaning in, that can make your life meaningful. It doesn't mean you have to be within the LDS Church. But at that point, the focus of the Sunstone seemed to be solely on the LDS Church and the issues.
Right.
Brighamites, yeah. And so we decided to step away. Well, jump ahead to the 2000 teens, and I had sort of, my subscription to Sunstone came and went. I read a lot of it online, but I discovered the Sunstone History podcast, which is Lindsay Hansen Park and what's his name? Brian Buchanan. And I loved what they were doing. And then I found out that Lindsay was sort of heading Sunstone at that point. And Stephen Carter was also, these two were pretty much the heads. And I loved what they were doing. And what I noticed is they were looking at Mormonism from a very broad perspective. And the Sons of Mormon History podcast. I mean, anyone who is watching this, Mormon, anti-Mormon, not Mormon, who is just interested in Mormon history, she and can do such a fantastic job bringing Mormon history to life. It's entertaining. I mean, they get all into the weeds. But it is
right. And Lindsay,
this isn't your grandpa's Mormon history, and it is not. It's the actual Mormon history.
That's right. And Lindsay had sort of come to her own by doing the Year of Polygamy podcast, yes, which took about 5 or 10 years to actually do. But in the midst of that, she participates in Sunstone and then becomes the executive director.
Yeah.
And Her philosophy is there's more than one way to Mormon.
And that philosophy was unveiled for the first time in March, second weekend of March in 2020, where they had started Sunstone and started sponsoring regional Sunstone symposiums. And they had one in Kirtland, Ohio. And I'd never been to Kirtland, and it was only a 9-hour drive. So I thought, I'm going to go. And so I went there, and that was my first face-to-face with people at Sunstone.
And that was just as COVID was happening. So you guys
Okay, so on the drive there, hearing a week or so about COVID, and we get there, and they said, okay, well, this COVID thing, let's all, instead of shaking hands, let's just bump fists. And we did that, didn't think a thing of it. There were no masks, nothing like that. And we were there for the whole week and got there Friday night. I left Monday morning. And as I'm driving out of Kirtland on Monday morning, I'm turning on NPR, and they're announcing that Italy has closed down. I thought, how the hell do you close down the country? And of course, over the next,
you just turn the sign,
the whole world.
Yeah,
turn
big signs.
Yeah. But I went to that conference. Yeah. And Lindsay has talked about on the flight home back to Utah on Monday. It was like, in the course of that flight, the entire world changed.
That's right. The world changed.
But yeah, so I remember for two reasons, that and also the world shut down the day it was over. But that was a fantastic, it was a great weekend. It was there were not a ton of people there. I'm assuming there might have been 75, 80 people. It was hosted by the Community of Christ in their visitor center, which is a big visitor center, really nice, right next to the Kirtland Temple. The Community of Christ sponsored a sort of a worship service on Sunday morning in the Kirtland Temple, where we went. They sort of did a takeoff of the endowment. It was sort of a self-guided tour of the temple with meditative points to do it along the way. So we went down into the basement of the temple and upstairs. The fellow who was sort of the who was in charge of the temple, and that Saturday night after everything was over, took a bunch of us up into the bell tower of the tower of the Kirtland Temple, and we could see where Brigham Young and certain people had carved their names when the in the rafters,
Were you tempted to yell "sanctuary" when the bell was being rung?
No, but that was what impressed me. There were all these Community of Christ officials there and members. There were LDS people there. There were a couple of, I say, middle-aged couples who had basically come across, they're having a faith crisis and sort of stepped away or left the church, but were still interested in somehow keeping in touch with things. So they were there. And then there was an entire slew of people from Christ Church, which is the righteous branch, the fundamentalist sect. They were there with some of their missionaries, and they actually did a program Saturday afternoon. But all these people were mingling together, and we were at the mixer on Friday night. We were all sort of talking and just all these perspectives, believers and non-believers.
We're all humans.
Yeah, and that's what, I think that's what Sunstone does best. And it was there that Lindsay revealed that the new slogan was more than one way to Mormon. And they were going to do a series of profiles of people, of individuals on the website. And if you wanted to be part of that, reach out to Ann Hatch, who's a polygamist, and because she was the one in charge of it. So I reached out to them and did a profile later in the summer that appeared on their page. And I just, at that point, I thought, okay, I got to reconnect with this. And I'm gay, and I had been in the closet until 2004. And what led me out of the closet was basically I was contemplating the King Follett discourse. And that is sort of the theology in that, and just the discourse is actually what clicked. Something clicked within me. And I was able to accept the fact that I was homosexual and just came out. So I came out of the closet because of Joseph Smith. And I thought that's an interesting story, but where on God's green earth would I find anybody even remotely interested in something that absurd? Lots of gay guys come out, middle-aged gay guys come out and come to terms with things in middle age, but who does it because of ideas in Joseph Smith's early theology that the LDS church has distanced itself from? And around this time in 2020, I thought, I could do a presentation at Sunstone, but it would require flying out to Utah. Well, because of COVID, the 2021 symposium was done online. And so I presented in 2021. Joseph Smith led me out of the closet was the name of my presentation. I did it and recorded it from my bedroom live during the symposium. And then it was
you should have started your presentation from your bedroom closet as you're coming out.
My bed was behind me. I was even bolder. I was doing it sitting in front of my bed, but which was occupied by no one by me at the time. But I did that, and then it wasn't until about really just a little over 2 years ago, I was looking at the Sunstone podcast, which is Stephen Carter's excellent podcast, a completely different podcast that you can watch on Sunstone. And I saw that he had taken my presentation and had made that an episode of the Sunstone podcast. And I'm not sure when that was. I guess it was
nice.
He did that later, like in October of 21, but I didn't see that until right towards the end of 23 sometime. And he did a beautiful, very flattering introduction to me on there. And he said, if you've been following Sunstone for a few decades, say 4, this fellow might be familiar to you. I thought, 4. Okay. So 40 years. I did the math. I thought, I've been published myself since the 80s. It's almost 40 years.
Yeah. Yep. I'm old.
Yeah. I knew that, but it just happened. But he
he brought it home, huh?
He brought it home. And so that was on there. And then anyway, anyone who, if you're not familiar with Sunstone, go to the website and their Sunstone History, Mormon History podcast, and Stephen Carter's Sunstone podcast are phenomenal. They really are. But then I decided to present again on Reformed Mormonism, the Mormon theological paradigm. I did that last year at 2024. And that was the first Sunstone Utah symposium that I had attended. And I presented.
That's right. And you were lucky enough to meet me in person.
I know, finally, because I felt like I knew you. And I met Rebecca and
Landon.
Landon back in March when I went to Utah for the reading of Beehive State. But I met you. I met John Heyman for the first time. I'd known him online for 9 years at that point. And what impressed me about both John and you were both tall dudes. You're tall. I don't know why I was expecting. I'm 6'1". I was expecting a little bit shorter, and you both thought, "Good gosh, you are big guys."
Yeah,
people don't realize that because I'm always sitting down that I'm almost 7 feet tall.
Are you really? That's amazing.
No, I'm not. As a matter of fact, I look like a small person compared to Gene.
He's 7 feet tall in one of your fictionalized plays.
That's the thing about celebrities in general, of which you both are, I guess, in this realm. But when I was in New York, and I would meet actors and stuff, famous actors. My brother and I, who was also in theater, we would joke that all the big stars are they're like fillet of people. They're all short and petite. They're little fellows. Tom Cruise, tiny little thing.
That's right.
I'm short, but anything but petite. I've never been called petite.
Yeah. And some of the people that you think are really heavy, you meet them in real life, certain celebrities, like, okay, they're not really all that heavy. They've got a round face.
So we touched about your Reformed Mormon involvement.
Yeah.
And what we didn't touch yet was that you helped out with the pageant. What was your position?
I was associate director of the Hill Cumorah pageant for the LDS Church. It was actually a calling from 1997 until 2003.
And I think you were on Mormonish. Was that the first time you were on Mormonish talking about that?
First, I was on Mormon Book Reviews talking about it, and Rebecca was a co-host. And so then when she started Mormonish, they had me come on and talk about that.
So we'll include that as a link in our description, as well as some of the other things we mentioned.
Yeah, but Sunstone, I mean, if you're in Utah and you're alienated from the LDS Church, you're having doubts, or you're totally in, but you want to learn you're open to other perspectives, I think it's a great place to go. I went last year, and the last few minutes of my presentation was an hour and a half presentation, but I was actually asked to appear on Gospel Tangents. And so that Monday I went and I was interviewed for 3 hours on Gospel Tangents.
Rick Bennett,
yeah. And great guy. And one of the first Mormon podcasters out there after DeLynn. But
yes, Randy, he's been on our show.
yeah, he's great. Wonderful man. But I was telling you what was so cool about Sunstone was that Saturday morning and Friday morning, I ate breakfast at the same table with this one fellow. I forgot his name. He's an elderly guy, but devout LDS, and a couple more others, more like me, more scholarly, not necessarily active in the LDS church, but just interested in Mormonism, and Sandra Tanner. And Sandra Tanner, I was reading her anti-Mormon stuff when I was 15, when I was investigating Mormonism. I read her newsletter.
She's royalty.
Month. Yeah. And
you told her that she helped convert you?
Well, I told her, I said, it's so good to me. I said, I started reading your stuff when I was 15 and joining and investigating Mormonism. She said, did you join the LDS church? I said, yeah. She goes, so it didn't work. I said, no, it really did work, because I left. I said, but it really introduced me to Mormon history and things that I couldn't have gotten anywhere else as far as documents go. And that was why I was reading it. And that's why many sort of students at BYU in the early 80s on the so-called Mormon History Underground were reading their stuff every month too, because they had these great, Xerox copies of documents that you weren't going to see anywhere else. But Sunstone, allows Sandra Tanner, Reformed Mormon, a devout Latter-day Saint, and 2 or 3 questioning Mormons to sit around a table twice and have breakfast together and laugh and share their perspectives and beliefs or lack of beliefs, and no one gets ticked off. No one gets defensive. That's what's so wonderful about Sunstone. It really embraces the fact that, there are many ways to be a Mormon. I think the Mormonism is it's been described as an ethno-religion, more like Judaism, in that it's a culture. An ethno-religion usually involves when people separate out of the larger culture, live in one place, and intermarry. Well, that's certainly Mormonism, especially LDS Mormonism, and a culture forms, and suddenly your identity. And this is why I think so many nuanced Mormons, Latter-day Saints, and Exmos, they have not disconnected from the culture, because you cannot disconnect from the culture that produced you. You can reject the beliefs, can reject the traditions, but the culture is what made you who you are. And so as I see it, Mormon culture, Mormons include atheists, agnostics, Orthodox, fundamentalist, nuanced believers, non-believers. If you're part of that culture, you're Mormon, regardless of what your position with the LDS church or any other denomination is. So whether you believe the religion or not, the things that are taught by these various sects and denominations, if you come to that culture, you're still culturally Mormon. And I think some of the most astute commentators, Exmos, who comment on Mormon culture and religion and the LDS church specifically, the reason they are so good at it is because the culture did at least present them and raise them with at least the ideal of truth, of objective truth. Whether it did that consistently, whether it did that just as to serve its own interests in the church, these people actually bought that. And they bought the idea, a very Mormon value of integrity, of personal integrity. And I think those values, are very deep in Mormon culture. And when people leave the LDS church, it's because they've embraced those Mormon values. There are other LDS Mormon values that aren't that great. Always follow the prophet, don't question, things like that. But there's so much good in Mormon culture. And people can leave the LDS church and not be Latter-day Saint and still be Mormon. And that's
Rob,
the that Sunstone acknowledges.
Rob, do you think possibly that's one of the reasons that Russell Nelson wants everyone to switch from saying Mormonism to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to separate them and divide them from the rest of the Mormon culture?
Here's my sarcastic thing. Since the time of Brigham Young, the church leadership has consistently chosen paths and positions, almost all of which they have eventually backed away from being pro-polygamy, we're never going to give this up, to being anti, just not just not ordaining Black Americans, but being racist, anti-Black, anti-civil rights, to being anti-ERA, anti-women's rights, anti-women working outside the home, anti-gay, and they have had to back and follow the culture. They basically have made, to quote the Book of Mormon or Mormon talk, they made Mormonism a hiss and a byword.
It's almost like every
the
time
LDS Church has denigrated the word Mormon, and now they want to separate themselves from it.
it's
So
almost
it's
like every
fault. If Mormonism has a negative connotation, it's because of the LDS Church.
it's almost like every time they rebrand, rebrand in such a horrible way that when they back away, they say, "Well, we don't do that anymore. See how good we are."
Yeah, but the thing is, I mean, this was my struggle when I joined the LDS Church in 1977. I saw that it was drifting towards Protestantism, and now it's actually gone more towards evangelical Christianity,
or even
when
Catholicism.
After having been gone for 10 years, when I rejoined in 94 in New York City, it was like suddenly Jesus. It was. I thought, this sounds so darn Protestant, and they were talking much more about Gethsemane and the atonement, and now everything's Jesus, the atonement, and all of this stuff.
Good Friday.
Which was not a big thing in Mormonism until the 1980s, maybe in the 90s. That was not something I heard people talking about in the 70s and 80s. It was all priesthood and the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith was much bigger in the LDS Church in the 70s and 80s, early 80s, than Jesus ever was. And it was better.
Du jour. Yeah.
But I think, I was going to think you were actually presenting at Sunstone a couple of years ago, and I was going to talk, where have all the Mormons gone? Because the RLDS, they originally were Mormons, and then when polygamy became sort of the defining aspect of Utah Mormonism, they ditched that term. The Bickertonites sort of did too. They didn't want to be confused with Brigham Young. And after polygamy was done away with, Mormons kept it. But they kept saying there's no such, I remember just 20 years ago, someone saying, one of the general authorities, maybe the president, saying there's no such thing as a Mormon fundamentalist. Okay. You can't be identified as Mormon and be a fundamentalist. And being fundamentalist means not following the brethren, the leaders of the LDS Church. And so I think it all derived from that too. When you started seeing Mormon polygamists in reality TV and on talk shows in the 70s and 80s, and people, a lot of very well-educated people still think that, I'm talking people, doctorates and master degrees who are well-read in other aspects, still think that polygamy is legal in Utah, or that Mormons, the LDS Church, still practices polygamy. And so I think
they'd like to.
Well, this is that, my position when they came out so vehemently against gay marriage. And at that time, I was very much a political conservative, sort of a libertarian. I thought, what does it matter what the state acknowledges as marriage? A religious denomination can still, deny it or not. The Catholic Church doesn't acknowledge Protestant marriages or marriages of a Protestant to a Catholic if it's not done by a Catholic priest. What's the difference? But I thought the reason they're scared of this is because if same-sex marriage is legal, then you can start to sort of change legally what marriage is. And that could they could end up making polygamy legal. And the only excuse that the church ever made for leaving polygamy is to uphold the laws of the land. So I think that's what it all boils down to.
Well, there's been such an emphasis lately on polygamy Even the cartoons they made for the kiddos, the primary kids, about polygamy.
Yeah.
And I've wondered if maybe they're preparing to bring it back.
I don't think so. But when I joined back in the 70s, I remember Woodward, I forgot his first name. He was the head religion writer for Newsweek magazine. And he, at this point, the LDS Church was very much in the news because of the ERA and feminism. And he wrote a wonderful defense of Mormon theology. And it was like a 5-page article in Newsweek that was fantastic. And he talked about, one of the drop quotes from it was that most people don't realize that Mormons don't, not only do they believe in God, they actually believe in and this was air quotes, Mrs. God. And he got into Heavenly Mother. And I thought it was a fantastic article. And all the people in my ward said, we don't believe in a Mrs. God. That's stupid. Now, they all believe in a Heavenly Mother, but we knew nothing about her. But just that he used that phrase, he came with Mrs. God, to describe for a secular audience, a non-Mormon audience, a Mormon belief, just ticked them off. But Woodward was, even then, he was interviewed in Sunstone, actually, by Peggy Fletcher Stack. And he said, I don't understand what why the Mormons hate polygamy, why they're so embarrassed by that history. He said, and this would have been around 1979, 1980. He said, given the direction of society about things sexual, it could probably be a good selling point. And I always thought that too in the 70s. Not that I wanted to be a polygamist, but I thought in the 70s, culturally, people forget, culturally, there was society is much more open about things sexually in the 1970s than they are now. And it's not just that we become things like pornography. Socially, we are more conservative about sex than we were in the 1970s.
Kenneth Woodward from Newsweek.
Woodward. Yeah.
It's like, are Mormons ready to meet the world?
Oh yeah, he's done some fantastic stories on them over the years. And I don't think that the LDS Church or Latter-day Saints realized what a champion they had in him. It wasn't that he was trying to be a missionary. He didn't believe it. But he, as far as giving a very nuanced, positive portrayal that didn't back away from the dark aspects of Mormon history and beliefs, he was a phenomenal writer. And again, Sunstone, realized that early on and did this great in-length interview with him. And so Sunstone has been at the front of all of the entire what has become Mormon studies.
He might have coined the term the Mormon moment.
He probably did. Yeah. And so the LDS Church, they always follow about 20 years later wherever society is going. I'm still convinced that within 10 years they're going to acknowledge same-sex marriage. They may not, perform them in the temple, but they're going to, within the next, I'd say 5 to 10 years, they're going to accept married gay members. They're going to have to. Either that or they won't, and they will become so small and insignificant, which is another real possibility. One of the biggest denominations in the first 100 years of American history were the Quakers. They were a major denomination. And in the late 1700s, they started excommunicating in the United States people who married non-Quakers, married outside of meeting. And as a result, their numbers plummeted. They still, because they were so progressive in so many other ways, they still became a huge force in American history and things like abolition of slavery and women's rights and humane treatment of the insane and prison reform. I mean,
Nixon was a Quaker.
Numbers shrank and have continued to shrink just because for a brief period of about 50, 60 years of their 400-year history, they became very authoritarian. And the same thing could happen to the LDS Church. I think if something called Mormonism is still around in 200 years, 400 years, it's going to be something like Reform Mormonism, which is just a more open way of, accepting your Mormon identity and connecting with that.
That's right. Well, Sunstone is coming up shortly. We'll air this episode as Michelle and I are driving to Sunstone.
I wish I was going. I'd planned to go.
Yeah. And so, if anybody is going to go to Sunstone and wants to say hi to me, I'll be there.
He'll be the tall guy.
There. I'll be undercover wearing these. What's it called when the army tries to blend in with the
camouflage?
Camouflage. I'll be wearing this camouflage shirt, so you'll be able to catch me. All right.
Well, that's gonna really bring people into Sunstone, just knowing that they'll be able to meet you personally, Gene.
That's right. It was so great. You manned a table last year most of the time. So
so my wife and I worked the registration desk.
Yeah. But you have, of course, you have vendors set up for various things. And well, it was like there was like an anti-Mormon pamphlet table. And then a couple of tables down, you had Mark Elwood doing, with his Glass Looker graphic novel series. And then you had Christ Church down there with their, very attractive young polygamous male missionaries wearing
pickles and
they have goods. And they have their own MAGA hats, but it's "Make Adam God Again."
Yeah.
So you have Adam God preaching fundamentalist Mormons next to anti-Mormons, next to some historians. And it's just a marketplace of ideas and perspectives, and everyone gets along. No one's arguing. It's great. I mean, I think society as a whole should be more like Sunstone.
That's right. And Steve Pinecker has been able to, a few of the last half dozen years, referee the polygamists versus the rest of Mormonism.
Yeah, I'm going to appear in the next few weeks where he's doing a shameless plug for him, if you don't mind. He's doing a panel discussion of the God Makers, which is the very famous evangelically produced anti-Mormon cartoon film that was done in 1984, I think. And I actually was not in the LDS church at the time. It was during my 9 years out, but I actually ordered a copy of the VHS and sort of had the darn thing memorized. It was very funny and frustrating and true in some ways and untrue in others. But he's having a panel discussion from people from various perspectives. It's mine because I was LDS and Reformed Mormon, but I was raised in Portsmouth, Virginia, which is the birthplace of Christian broadcasting. And so I grew up around evangelicals. Sandra Tanner is going to be on that, and many others from different perspectives.
Yeah. 1982 film.
Great. But 82 or 84, 82, yeah. So, but not just Sunstone, but podcasts like Latter Daily Digest. I mean, you all are making a difference. The entire conversation about all things Mormon has it's night and day compared to what it was even 10 years ago or 6 years ago. And it's because of what you guys are doing too.
What do you think, Randy?
There's a lot of podcasts. I so wish I could go this year. It sounds incredible. Kind of like the Comic-Con of Mormonism. And
wow. I cannot, yes, that's it.
I would love to attend, but I'm heading to the Oregon coast for a family reunion the same time Sunstone is going on. But, there's so many podcasts out there that are trying to slam the LDS Church and Mormonism, and that's not our goal. Our goal is to bring to light creators and their thoughts and their ideas. So I like to think of us as a little tiny mini Sunstone, preview.
The spirit of Sunstone.
I love the Gene, you latched on the idea of creators, because an anti-LDS or just probably simply, they're not creating anything. And I certainly believe in, you have to deconstruct everything in your life at some point as you grow up and come into your own, whether it's your religion, your politics, your culture, your family values, whatever. But in the process of deconstructing, you have to construct something. You have to create something. Otherwise, you're just a nihilist and your life means nothing. So you don't have to replace your religion with another religion, but you certainly do have to construct something from what you've deconstructed to give your life meaning. And that's why I think really your idea of creators is so pivotal to the broader discussion of Mormonism and religion. And really, given where we are in society, every aspect of our life, we have to be more creative.
We'll run that as a commercial. Right, Randy?
Right. I like it.
I will do a commercial for you guys anytime.
Well,
Yes,
you know what? You've been such an enjoyable, it's been so enlightening for me to hear from you, and what an incredible talent you have with your playwriting, and I just really admire your perception of the Mormon world.
Thank you.
It's been very enlightening for me.
Okay. Gene, can I do a shameless plug?
Yes.
My book, Three Plays for Latter-day Saints, it contains Digger and the Beehive State, and a third play called The Blessings of Jacob. And that's available at mormonplays.blogspot.com.
That's right. And I think I interviewed you about that book as well.
Yeah, you did. Thank you for that.
Yeah. And so
we can put that in the description, right, Gene?
That's right. Link? We'll have a link to it. And you know, doing these, every person I interview, I feel like my life is better having known the person that we bring on, the guests. But for Rob in particular is in the top 10%, I'll say.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you.
Just like I've told Randy Bell that he's one of the top 10 Christians I've ever met in my life. You know, former Mormon, now he's Christian. He embodies, you know, Christ-like behavior. He's not doing it all the time, right? He's living his life normally, but when he has a chance, he tries to help people out.
Yeah.
And so I feel the same in a way, love from you, and the things that you do from a place of love. You're trying to share with the world what's inside of you, and to make the world a better place because of it. That's what I feel.
You will too. And you're doing that through this podcast. And thank you for facilitating that for so many others.
That's right. Thanks everybody for watching. Have a great rest of 2025, and like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks.